Before you judge a woman of 72 for what I am about to do, you must first understand the chill. Not the ache in my bones that comes with a Cotswolds winter, but the insidious cold that seeps in when you realize you are no longer a person, but a problem to be managed. It all began in the spring, with a betrayal inside my own head. A minor stroke, the doctor in Cheltenham had said, his kind eyes failing to soften the blow. There is nothing minor about a civil war in your own veins, a mutiny where your own left side decides to stage a protest. My balance became a daily negotiation, and words, my lifelong companions from 30 years as a librarian, would sometimes hide behind my tongue like shy children. My daughter, Amelia, arrived at the hospital in a cloud of expensive perfume and performative concern. She was a masterpiece of controlled elegance, her slender frame draped in a cream cashmere wrap, her dark hair pulled back into a severe but stylish knot. The only warmth about her was the color of her lipstick. Her husband, Richard, lingered in the corridor, the blue light of his smartphone illuminating a face of handsome indifference. He was always looking at that phone, as if the world within that small glass rectangle was infinitely more important than the one I was struggling to remain in. I can't stay on my own, Amelia declared, the words sounding rehearsed. It was decided I would go to their house in Little Hembury, just until I was back on my feet. The phrase hung in the sterile air, heavy with unspoken conditions. Their home was nothing like my cluttered, book-filled cottage. It was a new build, a symphony in gray and chrome, with vast, echoing spaces and floors so polished you could see the grimace of your own reflection. It was a house to be featured in a magazine, not a place to recover one's soul. In those first few days, the care was impeccable. Amelia would prepare my meals on minimalist white plates, artfully arranged but lacking in substance. She'd fluff my pillows and speak to me in that bright, brittle tone one uses for difficult toddlers. She was always dressed impeccably, even in the morning. I remember one day she wore a silk blouse the color of champagne that clung to her chest as she leaned over to adjust my blankets. The fabric was cool against my arm, just like her. She'd look at my old, worn wedding band, a simple gold ring my dear Arthur had placed on my finger 50 years ago, with a faint, unreadable smile. Richard remained a ghost, a passing scent of expensive aftershave and the quiet tapping of his keyboard from his home office. The change was gradual, a slow turning down of a dial I hadn't even known existed. The hot, nourishing soups were replaced by tinned tomato, then by a single slice of toast, left on a tray by my door. The morning cups of Earl Grey became mugs of tepid water. My requests for a second blanket against the persistent chill of the house were met with a sigh and a reminder that the thermostat was centrally controlled. I was an inconvenience, a line item on a budget they were keen to reduce. The isolation was the worst part. They would go out for dinner, their laughter echoing from the gravel drive as they left, leaving me in the crushing silence of their perfect house. The loneliness was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered me. The hunger began to gnaw, a real, primal hunger that made my head spin and my hands tremble more than the stroke ever had. One evening, desperate, I managed to shuffle to the kitchen. The larder, a sleek, floor-to-ceiling cabinet, was locked. A small, silver padlock gleamed under the recessed lighting. It's for organization, Amelia had explained breezily a few days prior. You know how you get confused, Mom. I wasn't confused. I was being caged. I knew the difference between care and control. That night, I managed to jimmy the lock on a utility cupboard with a hairpin and found a forgotten tin of Scottish shortbread, tucked behind a bottle of bleach. The biscuits were stale, tasting of dust and desperation, but as I sat on the cold kitchen floor, cramming them into my mouth, they felt like survival. At IT was then that I heard them. They had returned early and were in the kitchen, their voices carrying through the open-plan space to where I huddled in the shadows of the utility room. They thought I was asleep upstairs. Amelia was talking about a holiday cottage they'd seen in Cornwall, right on the coast. It's perfect, she was saying, but the deposit is £20,000. There was a pause, and then Richard's voice, low and dismissive. We'll get it. We just need to be a bit more frugal for a few months. His meaning was horribly clear. I heard Amelia's faint protest, not of horror, but of caution. What if something happens to her? Richard laughed. A short, ugly sound. Don't be soft. She's tough as old boots. She can survive on bread and water for a while. It's not like she's going anywhere. A stray cat you throw scraps to now and then. That's all she is now. A stray cat. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs and the stale biscuit from my hand. The chill I felt then had nothing to do with the cold floor. It was the Arctic ice of absolute clarity. I was not their mother. I was an obstacle, an investment they were waiting to mature. I crept back to my room, my heart hammering not with fear, but with a cold, pure rage. They thought they had me trapped, a frail old woman in a gilded cage. They had forgotten one crucial detail. They had forgotten who paid for the cage. They had forgotten whose signature was on the deeds, on the trust documents, on every last share certificate that funded their perfect, soulless life. They thought they were dealing with a stray cat. They were about to find out that this cat had claws, and she was finally ready to use them. The following Sunday dawned with that pale, watery light that promises a classic English drizzle. I didn't mind. The rage that had solidified in my heart the night before was a furnace, keeping me warmer than any centrally heated radiator. Hunger was still a dull ache in my stomach, but it was nothing compared to the sharp, ravenous appetite I now had for justice. My plan was simple, and it hinged entirely on my neighbor, Beatrice. Beatrice and I had been friends for 20 years, ever since she'd moved in next door. A retired headmistress with a spine of steel and a garden that was the envy of the village. She missed nothing. I knew that at precisely 10:30 on a Sunday, after finishing the Sunday Times crossword, she would be in her greenhouse, tending to her prize-winning orchids. I positioned myself by the window in my room, which overlooked the immaculate lawn separating our two properties. At 10:31, her familiar silhouette appeared behind the glass panes of the greenhouse. I opened my window just a crack, the damp air smelling of wet earth and freedom. "Beatrice," I called, my voice a little hoarse from disuse. Her head snapped up. Even from this distance, I could see her sharp blue eyes narrow in concern. She put down her watering can and walked towards the fence. A handsome woman in her late 60s, practical in her tweed jacket and Wellington boots, her silver hair cut in a chic, no-nonsense bob. "Margaret, my dear," she said, her voice carrying easily across the lawn. "You look like a ghost. Are you all right?" Her directness was a bomb. "I need to speak with you," I said, my voice low. "Urgently. But they can't know." She didn't ask questions. She simply nodded, a flicker of understanding in her eyes, and disappeared back into her house. 10 minutes later, a gentle tap came at the French doors of the sitting room, the one room they rarely used. I shuffled to let her in, my heart pounding. She took one look at me, at the loose way my dress was hanging, at the dark circles under my eyes, and her face hardened. "Right," she said, marching past me and closing the curtains. "Tell me everything." And so I did. I told her about the shrinking meals, the locked larder, the single slice of toast. I showed her the half-eaten tin of stale shortbread I'd hidden in my knitting bag. But it was when I repeated Richard's words, the stray cat who could survive on scraps, that I saw a dangerous fire ignite in Beatrice's eyes. "The bloody vipers," she whispered, and for once, the formidable ex-headmistress did not apologize for her language. "This is abuse, Margaret. Criminal neglect. I know," I said, my voice steady, "but there's something they don't know. Beatrice, do you remember Arthur spending all that time with his solicitor in London before he passed? The one from that frightfully clever firm in Mayfair? Of course. He said he was future-proofing you." I let a small smile touch my lips for the first time in weeks. "He did more than that, Beatrice. He built a fortress, and he left me with the key." The understanding dawned on her face, slow and then all at once, followed by a fierce, triumphant grin. "Oh, you magnificent woman," she breathed. "Those fools haven't got a clue, do they? Not a single one." The truth was, Arthur, bless his methodical soul, had seen the potential for Amelia's ruthlessness and Richard's greed long before I had. He'd worked with a brilliant young solicitor, a Mr. Davies, to place every significant asset, the house, the stock portfolio, the savings, into an irrevocable trust. A trust that I alone controlled. They thought my name was on the letterbox. They didn't realize my signature was on the vault. I need a telephone, I told Beatrice. One they can't trace. I have a pay-as-you-go phone in the car for emergencies, she said instantly. Stay right there. While she was gone, I retrieved a small, locked document box from the bottom of my wardrobe, hidden beneath a pile of old photo albums. Amelia had searched my things upon my arrival, but she'd been looking for jewelry and cash, not boring legal papers. Beatrice returned not only with the phone but with a thermal bag. Shepherd's pie, she announced, placing a steaming container on the coffee table alongside a flask of hot, sweet tea. You can't plot a revolution on an empty stomach. As I ate the first real food I'd tasted in what felt like an eternity, the rich, savory mince and creamy potatoes warming me from the inside out, I dialed the number for Mr. Davies. It had been over a year, but his voice was just as I remembered it. Crisp, professional, and reassuringly calm. Mr. Davies, it's Margaret Callahan. There was a brief pause, and then the warmth flooded his tone. Mrs. Callahan, what a pleasant surprise. How are you keeping? I've been better, Mr. Davies, I said honestly. I need to see you. There are some legal matters that require immediate attention. Of course. Can you come to my office this week? I can't leave the house easily, I explained. Would it be possible for you to come to me? But it would have to be discreet. Another pause, this one longer. He was a smart man. He could read between the lines. Is there anything I should be concerned about, Mrs. Callahan? There might be, I admitted, but I'd rather explain in person. How about tomorrow evening? Say, 8 o'clock. I can tell them you're a consultant from Regal Household Assurance, reviewing my home insurance policy. Perfect, he said, a note of admiration in his voice. I'll see you then. After he hung up, I felt a surge of power that was more intoxicating than any medicine. The next evening, at 8 o'clock precisely, the doorbell chimed. I heard Amelia answer it. A young man, impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension, stood on the doorstep. His black Oxfords gleamed on their polished floor. Good evening, he said, his voice smooth as silk. I'm James Morrison from Regal Household Assurance. I have an appointment with Mrs. Callahan. Amelia's voice was laced with suspicion. An appointment? About what? Her home insurance policy, he replied smoothly. According to our records, she is the policyholder. I heard the confusion in their hushed whispers before Amelia appeared at my door. Mom, there's a man here about insurance. What's this about? Oh yes, I said, feigning a flicker of memory. There are a few details I need to sort out. I'll be right down. I made my way downstairs slowly, using my walking stick for dramatic effect as much as for balance. Mr. Davies stood in the hall, a picture of professional competence. His intelligent eyes met mine, and in that brief glance, a silent understanding passed between us. He knew. Mrs. Callahan, he said, extending a hand. Thank you for making the time. Of course, Mr. Morrison, I replied, playing along. Shall we talk in the sitting room? It's more private. I led him away, feeling the burning stares of my daughter and her husband on my back. In the sitting room, I closed the door and looked him straight in the eye. I think it's time, Mr. Davies, I said, my voice clear and strong. It's time to activate the fortress. Mr. Davies nodded slowly, his expression shifting from the pleasant mask of an insurance agent to the focused intensity of a legal predator. Tell me everything, he said, opening a sleek leather briefcase on the coffee table. As I recounted the events of the past few weeks, I watched his face harden. When I got to the part about the stale shortbread and Richard's stray cat comment, I saw his knuckles turn white as he gripped his pen. He was young, perhaps only in his late 30s, but he had the quiet, coiled energy of a man who enjoyed a good fight, especially on behalf of an underestimated client. He wore a crisp white shirt, the cuffs peeking out just so from his dark suit jacket, and a simple, elegant silver watch that spoke of quiet success. There was a faint scent of lemon and paper from his briefcase that was immensely comforting. And you have evidence of this? He asked, his voice a low, controlled hum. The locked larder? The denial of food? Beatrice took photographs this afternoon, I replied. And she's willing to provide a witness statement. But that's not what I want to focus on right now, Mr. Davies. First, I want to secure the perimeter. He understood immediately. The trust. You want to enact the full protective measures. I want them locked out of everything, I said, the words tasting like victory. The bank accounts, the credit cards, the house. Everything. I can have the paperwork drawn up and filed by Tuesday morning, he said, already making notes on a pristine legal pad. But you must understand, Mrs. Callahan. Once we do this, it's a declaration of war. There is no going back. They will be completely cut off. I glanced through the glass-paned door towards the hallway, where I could just see Amelia and Richard whispering agitatedly. I thought of their laughter as they left me alone in the silent house, of the cold dread of the locked larder. Mr. Davies, I said softly, turning back to him. They cut me off weeks ago. I am simply returning the favor. He left half an hour later, leaving behind a palpable sense of impending action. When I re-entered the main living area, Amelia and Richard were waiting, their faces a mixture of suspicion and irritation. Mom, Amelia began, her tone sharp. What on earth was that all about? What insurance policy? I gave them my most serene, slightly befuddled smile. Oh, there are so many things you don't know about my affairs, dear, I said gently. But don't you worry your pretty little heads. You'll find out soon enough. That night, I wrote in my journal, a simple leather-bound book Arthur had given me years ago. My handwriting was shaky, but the words were firm. Day 2. The counteroffensive has begun. Mr. Davies is preparing the artillery. They think I am a confused old woman. They think I am a stray. They are about to learn that strays are survivors, and some of us bite back when cornered. Tuesday morning arrived, gray and damp. Amelia brought me a piece of dry toast and a cup of weak tea, her face tight with unspoken questions. The atmosphere in the house was thick with tension. At precisely 10 o'clock, my real mobile phone, the one they didn't know Beatrice had charged and returned to me, rang. It was my bank manager, a polite man named Mr. Harrison. Mrs. Callahan, he said, we've received the final authorizations from your solicitor. The asset transfer is complete. All accounts are now solely under the control of the Callahan Trust, effective immediately. At 2 o'clock, as Mr. Davies had predicted, my phone rang again. This time it was Richard. For the first time since I'd arrived, his voice held no trace of condescension. It was tight with panic. Margaret, there's a problem with the accounts. I'm at the bank trying to arrange the deposit for the Cornwall cottage, and they're saying there are no funds available. They say everything's been moved. Oh dear, I said, feigning confusion. Moved? How strange. It's not strange. It's impossible, he snapped. You haven't left the house in weeks. How could you possibly move anything? Perhaps, Richard, I said, savoring each word, you don't know as much about my situation as you thought you did. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line before he hung up. At 3:30. A courier arrived with a thick legal envelope. I signed for it myself at the front door, much to the courier's surprise, and placed it squarely in the middle of the polished hall table. It contained official notifications of the revocation of all powers of attorney and a formal demand that they vacate the property within 30 days. The property they now had no legal right to inhabit. The storm broke when they returned home together at 5. They burst through the door, Richard's face puce with rage, Amelia's white with shock. She was clutching the legal documents in her hand as if they were venomous snakes. She wore a stunning emerald green dress that day, a sheath of silk that hugged her figure perfectly, but the color only served to highlight the pallor of her skin. Mom, she shrieked, her voice cracking. What is this? What have you done? It says you've put everything in a trust. It says we have to leave. It means exactly what it says, I replied calmly from my armchair. But that's impossible. You're ill, you're confused, Richard bellowed, jabbing a finger in my direction. Someone has manipulated you. Was I confused? Richard, I interrupted, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. When I heard you call me a stray cat, was I confused when you talked about how long I could survive on scraps? You thought I couldn't hear you. You thought I didn't matter." The color drained from his face. Amelia sank onto one of their ludicrously expensive minimalist sofas, staring at the papers. "But we're your family," she whispered. "Are you?" I looked her straight in the eye. "Because families don't lock the larder, Amelia. Families don't plot to sell their mother's house while she's still living in it. Families don't discuss her death as a financial convenience." My gaze hardened. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm rather tired. I believe Beatrice is bringing my dinner over shortly. You have 30 days to make alternative arrangements. I suggest you don't waste any of them." I stood up, leaning on my stick, and walked towards the stairs, leaving them sitting in the ruins of their beautifully curated, utterly hollow life. The stray cat had finally left the building, and she'd taken the whole damn house with her. The 30 days that followed were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Beatrice, my glorious co-conspirator, became my lifeline. She ferried in delicious, home-cooked meals, smuggled my laundry out under the cover of darkness, and provided a running commentary on the escalating chaos next door. They tried everything. At first, it was Amelia's tearful phone calls. "Mom, please, we can sort this out. You're not well, you don't understand what you've done." When that failed, Richard attempted to bluster his way past Mr. Davies, only to be met with a wall of polite, unshakable legal jargon. I learned from Beatrice that he'd had to sell his precious sports car, a gleaming silver Jaguar he polished every Sunday, just to pay the initial retainer for a solicitor of his own. The sight of it being driven away by its new owner, a portly man in a tracksuit, apparently brought tears to his eyes. I felt a flicker of something, but it wasn't pity. They became prisoners in their own home, just as I had been. With their credit cards canceled and bank accounts frozen, their lavish lifestyle ground to a halt. The weekly Ocado delivery of organic produce and expensive wine ceased. I watched from my window as Amelia, clad in designer sportswear, emerged from a budget supermarket clutching a single carrier bag, a thunderous expression on her face. The daily cleaner was let go. The gardener stopped coming. The perfect house began to fray at the edges, mirroring the unraveling of its inhabitants. My granddaughter, Clara, was the one person I felt a pang of guilt for. She was 25, a bright, kind-hearted junior doctor working long hours in Bristol. She called me utterly bewildered. "Gran, what's going on? Dad's being very strange, and Mum just cries whenever I ask. They said you've thrown them out." "Clara, my love," I said, my voice gentle, "there is a great deal your parents haven't told you. When this is all over, I will explain everything. But you must trust me. I am perfectly safe and perfectly sane." I knew she was torn, but I also knew she had inherited her grandfather's sense of fairness. The final day arrived, a brisk, bright morning at the end of October. I had arranged for a taxi to collect me at 11. Mr. Davies had secured me a lovely, sunny two-bedroom flat in a modern retirement complex in Cheltenham, a stone's throw from the library where I'd spent my happiest years. At 10:30, as I was doing a final check of my room, Amelia knocked and entered without waiting for an answer. She looked haggard. Her expensive clothes hung on her, and her face was pale and puffy. She wasn't wearing any makeup. She clutched a small, framed photograph in her hands. It was a picture of the three of us, taken years ago at Clara's university graduation. We were all smiling. "You can't do this," she whispered, her voice raw. "This is our home, no, Amelia," I said, turning to face her. "This is my home. You were merely tenants, and your lease has expired." Her face crumpled. "I know we made mistakes. I know we weren't perfect, but I'm your daughter. Doesn't that mean anything?" "It means you should have been the one person in the world I could trust," I replied, my voice devoid of heat, only a great, weary sadness. "It means you shouldn't have listened while your husband compared me to a stray animal you could starve into submission. You stood by and let it happen, Amelia. That is something a daughter should never do." She flinched as if I'd struck her. She held out the photograph. "Please, Mum, don't leave like this." I looked at the picture, at the smiling woman who had once been my daughter, and then back at the stranger standing before me. I shook my head slowly. The woman in that photograph wouldn't have recognized the person you've become. And frankly, neither do I. I walked past her and down the stairs. Richard was standing in the hall, his arms crossed, a look of impotent fury on his face. He looked smaller, somehow, without his expensive suits and air of entitlement. My taxi was waiting. As I stepped out into the crisp autumn air, I took one last look at the house. The immaculate lawns were now overgrown, a few weeds daring to sprout in the gravel drive. It was just a building, I realized. A shell. The warmth, the love, the life, Arthur and I had built all of that, and I was taking it with me. My new flat was bright and warm, filled with my own familiar furniture and books that Mr. Davies's firm had arranged to have moved from storage. It smelled of beeswax and old paper, the scent of my real life. That afternoon Clara arrived. She carried a large bouquet of freesias, my favorite. Her eyes were full of questions. I made us a pot of tea using my own teapot and my favorite china cups, and I told her everything. I showed her Beatrice's photographs and read her the entries from my journal. I watched her face shift from confusion to disbelief, and then to a quiet, horrified anger that I had no idea. "Gran," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I am so sorry that it is not your apology to give, my love," I said, patting her hand. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Now," I said, looking around my sun-filled living room, at the shelves groaning with books waiting to be read. "I am going to live." A few weeks later, an official-looking letter arrived. It was from Richard's solicitors, a final, desperate attempt to challenge the trust. Mr. Davies had already warned me it was coming. A Hail Mary pass, he'd called it. Utterly without merit. Tucked inside the legal documents, however, was a smaller, personal envelope addressed to me in Amelia's handwriting. I opened it with a sense of detached curiosity. It was a single sheet of paper. Asterisk, "I know this won't change anything." Asterisk, she had written. Asterisk, "But I want you to know that the man you heard in the kitchen that night, that wasn't the man I married. Or perhaps it was, and I just refused to see it. He's gone, Mum. He left last week. Said this was all my fault for not being able to manage you properly. I am alone in a rented flat with nothing but my own foolishness for company. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know. Amelia." Asterisk, I folded the letter and placed it on the table. A chapter had closed. A stray cat, she had called me. Well, this stray had not only survived. She had reclaimed her territory, sent the feral tomcat packing, and was now basking, purring, in a patch of warm, welcoming sun. And she was finally, wonderfully, free. The letter from Amelia sat on my mantelpiece for a week, a pale ghost amidst the cheerful clutter of my new life. I didn't reread it. Her words, stripped of their usual artifice, were a sad, flat postscript to a story I was determined to leave behind. My days settled into a gentle rhythm, dictated not by the whims of others, but by my own desires. I spent mornings in the small, sunny spare bedroom I had designated as my study, surrounded by my beloved books. In the afternoons I would walk, my stick tapping a steady beat on the Cheltenham pavements, rediscovering the town that held so much of my history with Arthur. It was in the library, my old sanctuary, that the next chapter truly began. I had gone in simply to breathe the familiar air, a perfume of paper, dust, and infinite possibility. The new chief librarian, a brisk, kind woman named Patricia, recognized me and we fell into easy conversation. As we spoke, an elderly gentleman I vaguely knew from my tenure, a Mr. Albright, hovered nearby. When Patricia was called away, he approached my table, his eyes full of a hesitant, desperate hope. He told me a story in hushed tones, a story about his son, who had taken over his finances after his wife's death and had recently sold his father's cherished stamp collection, dismissing it as a silly hobby. He spoke of feeling invisible in his own home, of his opinions being treated as the nonsensical ramblings of a dotard. He had read about my situation in a small piece in the local paper and had wondered if it was true that one could fight back. His story was a pebble dropped into the still pool of my new contentment, and the ripples spread. I spoke to Clara about it that evening over the phone. She told me of an elderly patient who was brought in for malnutrition, whose daughter insisted she was just a fussy eater. I spoke to Beatrice, who recounted tales from her time as a headmistress, of seeing the subtle, cruel ways adult children could diminish their aging parents. A pattern emerged, a silent, creeping epidemic of disregard happening behind the closed doors of respectable houses. We were having tea in my flat. Clara, Beatrice, and I, when the idea took shape. We need a place, Clara said, her young face fierce with conviction. A place for people like Mr. Albright. A place for them to tell their stories and learn they aren't alone. Place for the strays. She looked at me, her eyes shining. We should call it the Stray Project, Gran. Reclaim the word. Turn their insult into our armor. And so we did. Patricia, a true kindred spirit, offered us a meeting room at the library every Thursday afternoon. Beatrice, with her formidable organizational skills, drew up schedules and arranged for tea and biscuits. Mr. Davies, bless his noble heart, offered to run a free legal clinic once a month, advising on powers of attorney and asset protection. Our first meeting saw a dozen nervous faces, people who had been made to feel powerless, who had forgotten the sound of their own voices. I stood before them, not as a victim, but as a survivor, and I told my story. I spoke of the cold toast and the locked larder, and I saw nods of recognition. I spoke of the moment I decided to fight back, and I saw flickers of hope. Months passed. The Stray Project grew, becoming a lifeline for dozens. We were a quiet army of the overlooked, sharing stories, pooling knowledge, and reminding each other of our own value. I even saw Amelia. She had requested a meeting, and I agreed to coffee at a neutral cafe. She looked thinner, her elegance replaced by a fragile sobriety. She told me she was in therapy, that she was trying to understand the woman she had become. She apologized, not with the histrionics I might have once expected, but with a quiet, hollowed-out sincerity. I accepted her apology not as a pardon, but as an acknowledgement of a truth we both now understood. Our relationship would never be what it was, but perhaps, in time, it could become something new, something more honest. A year to the day after I had moved into my flat, I felt a deep, settled peace. The project was thriving. I had a tentative, evolving relationship with my daughter, and the unwavering love of Clara and Beatrice. The war was over, I thought. I had won. That afternoon, the phone rang. It was Mr. Davies. His voice was different, lacking its usual crisp efficiency. It held a note of something I couldn't quite place. Puzzlement, perhaps even awe. Mrs. Callahan, he began, I do apologize for the intrusion. We were conducting a final audit of the trust documentation, a mere formality, and we found something. An anomaly. There's a secondary codicil, added by your husband just a month before he passed. It was sealed, with instructions to be opened only by you, and only upon the full dissolution of your legal ties to your daughter and her husband. He paused. It seems, by reclaiming your independence, you have fulfilled the condition. My heart began to beat a little faster. What is it, Mr. Davies? It's not a document, he said slowly. It's a key. A key to a safe deposit box at a private vault in London. There was a note with it, in your husband's hand. He read the words aloud, and the air in my sunlit room suddenly felt charged with electricity, thick with secrets from a man I thought I knew completely. The note was short, just 5 words that blew the roof off my quiet, orderly world. *4 When you are truly free. *.